everybody. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. My name is Betsy Bradley. I'm the director of the Mississippi Museum of Art, and it's a great honor for me to welcome all of you here to our space today. We've been so honored to work with a fabulous team at Mississippi Today who has put together such a good program. And together with the museum, we want to remember and thank the sponsors, the Mississippi Humanities Council and Bradley Aram law firm. We hope that you think this is a fitting setting for this program. We certainly do. Like Mississippi Today, the Mississippi Museum of Art is about finding truth. All of these reporters who have been talking about various ways they investigate these issues that are important to all of us, employ some of the same tactics that we employ and that artists employ. You all know the famous quote that was written by John Keats: "Beauty is truth, truth is beauty. That's all you need to know on earth, and all there is." Just messed it up somehow. But what you may not know is that Keats wrote those lines as he was staring at an artistic object, a Grecian urn. And he was in fact interrogating that urn. In these 5 short stanzas of the poem, he asked the urn 9 questions. And that's not dissimilar from what we do here at the museum. We interrogate artworks, objects of art, to try to find their meaning, to find the truth and the beauty in them. We also interview, in the same ways that many of you interview people, artists in the community, to try to get at answers and solutions. But we do ask more questions than we provide answers. We also investigate narratives. Much of your writing is about narratives, and we are interested in the narratives told by art, especially about Mississippi, our people, our places, and our history. And we want to poke holes in narratives that don't ring true. Artists help us see, for example, the effect on humanity and on the human soul of our history's legacies of racial trauma and inequity. The narrative that we know is true is that Mississippi's story is the American story. The founding of our state as a laboratory for generating wealth based on taking land from one people and labor from another is the story of our country's relationship to money, power, and race. Like Mississippi Today, we know that to the extent that we connect our narrative to those outside of our borders, to the extent that we deploy artists to investigate their personal stories to find new truth and new humanity, is the extent to which we can imagine and envision a new model of shared prosperity, increased understanding, and universal human dignity. So our current exhibitions that I hope you'll take a few minutes to wander through feature one, in New Symphony of Time, a narrative shared by poet Margaret Walker about blackness throughout time and place, and that of Nick Cave in the Barksdale Galleries in the back of the building, finding magic and joy in a journey that for him began with fear and uncertainty. Cave is an artist based in Chicago. He began making the sound suits you will see as armor to hide his identity and protect him from violence that had just befallen Rodney King. Margaret Walker insists that we relearn the strength and resilience and power of the people too often depicted as victims and treated as less than human. These are the kinds of questions we're asking, and these are the questions we will continue to ask. Hard questions, but we want to connect the power of art to the power of the people in our community and all of our imaginations. And we want to link and connect Mississippi to the rest of the world in ways that we hope increase our collaborative and common commitment to truth. So, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce to you 3 people who also work tirelessly to find the truth, to correct narratives, and ultimately to restore the beauty that has in some cases been taken from the human story. Jerry Mitchell knows that questions and interrogations uncover truth and restore humanity. For more than 30 years, he interrogated people and documents and histories at the Clarion Ledger to find the true stories, to help correct stories. And his work, as you all know, led to many civil rights cases being reopened and successfully tried in the late 20th century. Because of his work, Byron Dale Beckwith, Sam Bowers, Bobby Cherry, and Ray Killen were brought to trial, and the stories were told there that helped bring the community back together again. Jerry's a MacArthur Fellow and a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and he's just launched the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, a natural extension of his desire to push the questions aimed at the truth even further and wider. And stay tuned, on February 4th, he'll be launching his new book, Race Against Time, with an opening at Lemuria, a signing at Lemuria. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bragg is changing the narrative about the role of race and bias in sentencing patterns of children in Mississippi. She's also exploring the issues of police shootings, issues central to art in our galleries back there by Nick Hay. And her work has been recognized and rewarded for its deep analysis and truth-telling. She's been an investigative fellow at Reveal and has been published by Scalawag Magazine, The Appeal, and Jackson Free Press. And finally, Anna Wolf investigates the impact of poverty on economic justice. She's worked for the Center for Public Integrity, the Jackson Free Press, and the Clarion Ledger, and has been awarded the Bill Miner Prize for Investigative Journalism, not once, but twice. We're thrilled to welcome you all to the museum and to this conversation. Jerry, I'm turning it over to you.
So actually, and yeah, we have it all worked out. I'm obviously not Jerry, but we decided that it would be a disservice to everyone to have Jerry moderate because he has so much cool stuff to say. And so we're just gonna like turn into a conversation. And so I guess maybe I'm the moderator a little bit because I emailed all the questions. But I guess it's probably a natural place to start with this one, which is like what has been our path to journalism, investigative journalism, and doing that in Mississippi. So, who wants to start?
Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah,
Okay.
you answer.
So, I guess like my start with journalism was in college. I like edited the school paper at Spelman, which was out of print, and so kind of revived that, but then also realized I didn't know what I was doing, and so I decided to get my master's at Columbia, did a second year at Sciences Po in Paris, and then when I finished high school, actually, my mom decided to move us to Neshoba County, to Philadelphia, Mississippi. And so that really changed my life. And when I finished grad school, I thought, especially in the wake of the 2016 election, there was no better place to do journalism than in Mississippi, than to elevate narratives of people who had become my family and my friends that I wasn't seeing done well. So that's kind of how I got into journalism and why I've been in Mississippi for like the last decade.
I think mine is a sort of straightforward path into journalism. I always knew that I loved to write, but wasn't that good at it. I was much better at asking questions. And so I went to Mississippi State, studied there, and came to Jackson after graduating to work for the Jackson Free Press, where I was hired on as an investigative reporter as well. So really started digging in at the Free Press and in Jackson, and have called Jackson my home ever since. I came from Washington State originally, so quite a culture shock, but now call Mississippi my home.
It's my mother's fault. She had me reading 3 newspapers a day by the time I was 7, plus magazines. So anyway, I guess there's some blessings of the pre-internet world. Anyway, but it was, so not surprisingly, I was editor of my high school paper. I got involved with it, and anyway, I can always tell stories. I hesitate. We'll answer questions, and then we'll have time for stories. That's it, pretty simply. Someone asked me the other day, "How long have you been in journalism?" I go, "Well, do you count high school?" So since 70, fall of 75. So anyway.
And this may be a way for you to tell one of those stories that you're avoiding. What I think we can talk about now, if there was, I think we're all probably pretty big history nerds. I know I claim to be one. Was there a moment in history that you either learned about or lived through that made you want to be a journalist and made you want to tell stories?
Well, I mean, I guess I started doing it pretty early. In terms of becoming an investigative reporter, I can tell that story. I was working, really at this point, I'm thinking I'd be a columnist, those kind of things. I was just writing more really than the other aspect of the job. And so I wind up at this little small newspaper in East Texas, a little place called Carthage, Texas. And like semi-weekly, only came out twice a week. And I'm thinking I am at the end of the world, And so I'm working for this guy that's burned out. Like, this guy used to apparently be a really talented journalist, but he's burned out. He's smoking 2 packs of Marlboros a day, chain smoking. This is back when newsrooms, everybody smoked, and you didn't have a choice to, if you didn't smoke, you still smoked, because you got all the smoke on you and in you. And so he's smoking. He's like, "Hey, what do you think you want to do in journalism?" I'm like, "I'm thinking about investigative reporting." He goes, "Have you ever read All the President's Men?" I go, "I've seen the movie." He says, "Read the book and study how they use attribution." Absolutely the best advice I ever got in journalism in my entire life. And I got it this little tiny paper in Carthage, Texas. So
I remember getting that advice from you at the
Yeah, there you go. And you probably did. You did probably read the book, didn't you? That's it for that.
Can I push you to talk a little bit about what it was like, I guess, like doing the work you did, looking at Klansmen and stuff like that?
Looking at Klansmen? Oh, gosh. Well, I'll tell my Beckwith stories. I'll try to keep it close and tight. I went to interview Byron D. LeBeckwith, the guy that obviously assassinated Meg Rivers here at Jackson. And he lived in Signal Mountain, Tennessee, which is just outside of Chattanooga, if you know where that is. And spent about 6 hours talking to him. Absolutely the most racist person I ever spent serious time with. But I knew it was important for me to talk to him because, and that's what I did with all these Klan guys, try to talk to them early, because I knew if I didn't go talk to them early, if they were arrested, they're not going to talk to me, or if they have a lawyer, they're not going to talk to me. So every single one of these guys I tried to go talk to early. So that's why I did that. So I spent about 6 hours talking to him. It was inward this, inward that, and then he got on the Jews. He's very, very anti-Semitic, and in all the races. He was pretty much an equal opportunity racist, And so, yeah, it is funny. Anyway, I'll tell this real quick. So at some point during the conversation, his wife brings out this, looks like orange soda, only it's like bubbling furiously like a mad scientist potion, And I'm like, what is that, And he explained to me it was hydrogen. It was indeed orange soda. It was combined with food grade hydrogen peroxide, and I'm just like, what? And then his wife brought me one. But anyway, we got done. It was starting to get dark. He insisted on walking me out to the car and get out to the car. He's like, it tells me, it says, if you write positive things about white Caucasian Christians, God will bless you. If you write negative things about white Caucasian Christians, God will punish you. If God does not punish you directly, several individuals will do it for him. And so his wife had made me a sandwich. I think you can guess what I did with the sandwich.
I'm thinking about just like the privileges that you had in that room, being a white man, having that access because you were
I couldn't
a white
have
man.
done that if I had not been a white Southerner.
Exactly.
He actually asked me a whole series of questions before I got there, like where do you live?
Sure.
What are your parents' names? Where do you go to college? Where do you go to church? You know, and I could have not answered them maybe, you know, but I knew that he would love my answers. And so I just answered honestly, and he was like, come on.
Co, I want to hear from you about that. You know, what is it like knowing that you will not be able to access that story?
Yeah, I guess like what immediately I think about was, I guess, and then I'll answer, is I can't remember the woman's name, but the woman who won the Pulitzer for going and knocking on Dylan Roof's family's door and sitting down, she's a black woman, and talking to him and talking to his family about what he had done. And I think the reason that story ends up being so revelatory is because the elephant in the room is that there's this black woman in this home talking to people who raised someone who did something unspeakable. And so I think that there's like a dance. Sometimes it ends up being very interesting to be a black woman here in Mississippi and walking into very white, powerful spaces and demanding that people answer me. Especially when I'm there on behalf of people who look like me, who don't feel like they have access to those spaces. And so I think sometimes, yeah, I probably am not going to volunteer to go talk to a Klansman, but sometimes I think that even if it doesn't become part of the story, that having that dynamic and making people answer people that look like me on behalf of people that look like me, it can be kind of intimidating, but I think that that's really important.
It's a different story that
Yeah.
you're going to get. Yeah.
I think that's great. I think that's great. Great approach.
Yeah. You want to talk about your
Go
moment?
ahead, Anna.
Well, no, I guess I'll, I just want to say something about investigative journalism in general, because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions, and really we're just journalists who are not scribes, and we ask deeper questions, and really most journalists doing this work are investigative journalists. We don't have any kind of like special powers. We're members of the public, just like y'all. And so, yeah, I think we all have experienced that. If y'all have anything to offer on that.
Do you want to talk about that maybe in the context of like your latest story or a story that comes to mind?
I did just publish a series on these correctional restitution centers. And yeah, I think I got this tip that a woman, a longtime source of mine has a friend who was a woman who was imprisoned at MDOC, but working at McDonald's. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. I don't know about inmates working behind the scenes dishing up my fries at McDonald's and Popeyes. And went a little bit deeper and was quickly realized that I wasn't going to be able to get any answers out of MDOC. They never actually allowed us to do any interviews for this story. And found out just by talking to people, literally driving around to these restaurants and, you know, talking to one person, figuring out where another inmate was working, was able to put together a story about how people are being indefinitely held in prison-like facilities while they work to pay off debts related to criminal convictions. And that story published on Thursday, and was something that, you know, not a lot of people know about. So it was definitely the first time that anyone's looked into these, and that is kind of quintessential investigative journalism.
And I think that's a lot of what investigative journalism is, in a sense of we like to go in these hidden worlds. Not that general reporters can't too, but I'm just saying that's what's attractive about it to some extent, to go into a Klansman's house or to restitution, exploring these places that are hidden like prisons and things like that,
Yeah, I think the story that I most recently published was about how Mississippi charges children as adults, and the bias that happens at every point in the system, from arrest to whether they go to adult jail to how long they actually spend incarcerated. And for me, I think all journalism starts with a question, but for me, it was, what made me spend 2 years on this story was that the mom, whose 13-year-old son had been arrested for and charged with felony armed robbery for stealing a cell phone and $1 while using a BB gun in commission of this crime. And it was front page news, and this kid was in solitary confinement, and his mom had no idea what was going on. She didn't know who to call. She didn't know how to get him out on bond. She didn't know basic aspects of the system. And I was like, there's so many, the list goes on and on of the way the system fails people, but also I was like, I'm failing too. As a reporter, if it's not clear to people like her what the hell is going on. And so I think for me, it was like her question in the back of that stuck with and ends up being like the driving force in the radio story is this the first time a kid has been charged as an adult here? And I was like, no. No, absolutely not. This has been going on since slavery. But I didn't have good numbers for her. And so that was the driving force of let me get these numbers. And I think sometimes it can be, and it does end up being a story about holding powerful accountable, but it's also about giving stakeholders answers about their own lives and about what's going on about the people that they're raising or who they love. And I think at the core of it, if you're answering those questions and you can make a crazy system with a lot of bad data and numbers and things that don't make a lot of sense to this day make sense to a mom in crisis, for me, that I feel like that's the bar for me. Yeah.
Okay. So we always like to have data to back up what we're talking about, so we're not just focused on one anecdote, one person we interviewed, but we can show how this person represents an entire population. And we were talking about this earlier. It's so hard because Mississippi has a lot of record-keeping issues, but we have to figure out, and that's probably is the most difficult part of our job, is what's the document, or what is the record-keeping mechanism that we need to access to get those answers. And sometimes we have to create it ourselves. So for the story that I was just talking about, we actually reviewed sentencing orders for people who were in these programs during a snapshot in time, and we had to cross-reference several different types of records to put together a database of our own that we could then analyze. And this took hours and hours and hours, and really it was this big database that we created just to get one statistic, and that's what it takes. And Ko, I know you had the same experience with that story, because you had to go through cases dating back just to get a percentage, right?
Right. And I think so looking at, so for example, I wanted to know how many kids have been charged as adults in the state of Mississippi. I couldn't just Google this, didn't exist. And so at first I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm going to start in this one county. I'm going to start in Neshoba County, where this case took place. And the Neshoba Democrat publishes the jail docket every week. So someone goes to the jail every week and writes down who has been arrested for what their address is, how old they are, what the charges are, and whether they were bonded out or not. So every week you can just pick up the paper and say, oh, someone's cousin is in jail again. And it does become kind of it fuels town gossip, but it's also online, which means that and there's no follow-up as to what happens to these people, and that's an aside. But what it meant to me was, here's some data, and in this data I can find out who these children were and what they were arrested for. And then that means that those who were indicted have a case at the courthouse, which is none of those files are online, which means that I need to figure out how many, just block out days between Monday and Friday, 9 p.m. to 4:30-ish, because they start to get antsy and kick you out, of where I can take this list of 7 dozen kids that I found and physically go through files and like find those cases and then scan those cases so I don't have to pay $1 a page, because at this point we're talking thousands of dollars. And so that's what I was going to do, and that was going to be the end of it. But I was like, this is not good enough. You know, we have 82 counties, and I can't go sit on the floor and do this over and over again, and I won't do it because my nails are suffering on a very shallow perspective. But also, it's just like not possible. And so, luckily, I found out that there exists, you know, court data going back 25 years that the state collects. It's really bad, and it's so bad it's hard to get. It's like the Administrative Office of Courts says, you know, we don't have to respond to public records requests as of 2008. So I sent a public records request anyway, and they were like, nope, can't have it because we don't have to respond to public records requests. But they have a policy that says you can have our information, you just can't ask for it using the language that you would ask for, you know, like a police report, for example. And so once I stripped all that language after some emails, I got it. But it's like, at this point, it's like, you know, I had the luxury of being a full-time investigative reporter who was all in on this story. But if I had a day-to-day be, this is annoying and I don't have time for it. And it's like, I have the right to access this information. And so from there, we got like a gigabyte of data. And so we have everyone, probably not everyone, because it's manual entry, someone sitting up in a courthouse putting this stuff in and sending it in from all different counties and just like styles. So it's a mess, but it's the best that we had. And from that, we were able to, the data reporter that I worked with at Reveal was able to find that at least, and this is like a very conservative estimate, 5,000 kids have been charged adults in Mississippi since 1994. Of those, 75% are Black. That does not look like Mississippi. And Black and white kids match up pretty much 1-to-1 in census data. Black and white kids, you know, from the moment of arrest, there's bias there. There's a disparate number of Black children being charged for things. And so it's like, we took that and looked at every step, and sentencing was different, but this took so much time. And it took so much effort. Like, it took that manual effort, and it took that fighting back and knowing what my rights are and knowing that I have a right to this data. And that's ridiculous. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, what's at stake, right? I need this count so that I can do more reporting based on this and like hold people accountable, et cetera. But it's like, you know, other states don't work like this.
So it's a lot less sexy than people think it is most of the time. Just, you know, doing that kind of data entry and going through those records.
And if you're doing like historical stuff, it gets even more boring because you go to like archives and go through microfilm, and I know those archives folks pretty well. So.
Same.
And so, looking through old newspapers, all those kinds of things, it's a lot less sexy than it looks. So,
can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So I know like Mississippi's prisons are like pretty much in a continual state of crisis, but
yes.
They're in a particular one right now.
Yes.
And you've been doing a lot of reporting and like kind of keeping track of what's going on. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, I mean, like I was talking about Hidden Worlds, I mean, you just basically, because MDOC essentially doesn't talk, period, almost, I mean, maybe that much, but almost nothing. You have to develop sources within the prisons themselves. So you family members. I'll tell the story of how I even got onto prisons. This is 2013. I'm in the newsroom, and I get a phone call from this guy, and it was an inmate, and he was calling me from prison on his cell phone. So, and this is what you come to find. I mean, there are cell phones everywhere. I mean, this is not uncommon now. I mean, it seemed uncommon to me at the time. But I literally talked to that guy almost every day for an entire year. And most inmates who reach out to us in general, although it's changed over this past year, generally what they're doing is they're reaching out, well, let me tell you about my case, I got railroaded or whatever. I'm not saying it may all be true, but that tended to be. And then this inmate, said to me, I want you to know about all the corruption that's taking place. Guards are opening doors so inmates can get beaten. This is happening. All these things are happening. And so then he actually, I guess I can give this away. This is a bit of a giveaway. So he he sent me a whole stack of documents, and the way he did it was through the legal mail. And he sent it, asked me for the name of a lawyer and his address. And so I checked with the lawyer to make sure it was okay, and gave him the lawyer's name and the address. So literally, he sent his legal mail, sent this as legal mail so it would not be read. And so then I got that and began to investigate. And that was Wilkinson Prison, which is a private prison. That kind of got me onto it. I spent a whole year. We did a whole package of stories, editorials, etc. Chris Epps got indicted, I think, within 10 days, after our series ran. The FBI was already investigating him. So then I got interested. You would think that it would get better, right? You throw, at least in theory, the bad guy out, right? And you bring in new people. But it's gotten much, much, much worse. And I knew it had, and then teamed up with ProPublica and began looking at them again. And that's how you do it. You develop, you have inmates who then talk to one another, and then they contact you by letter, by email, by phone, by text. Sometimes they'll text you photos, or they'll send you photos, or they'll send it through a family member, videos. It's amazing how many photos and videos I had this go around. It was just incredible. They were telling me about this empty tower, that there wasn't a guard in their unit. And this is going on all the time now. It's so understaffed. They don't even have a guard in the tower. So literally the inmates are left to themselves. So I was kind of asking this, well, you have proof of this, or photo? Next thing I know, I'm getting a text of a photo of the empty tower. So that's what you do. It's not complicated, actually, and you begin to develop, and then they begin to trust you, and then they reach out to other people and they trust you, and you just develop these relationships over time.
Yeah, I wanted to second your championing of archives. I spent a lot of time in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History working on the story I've been talking about, and probably will continue talking about until, I don't even know, forever. Because one of the questions that was important to me in looking at kids being charged as adults was, how did we get here? And when did this start? Who came? Because it's something that someone had to decide one day in the legislature. Oh, this is how we need to handle children. And so I spent months and months and months going through, you can track any law that is currently in the Mississippi Code. You can track every single time it's changed, even if they moved a semicolon, that exists, and there's a record of that, and you can look at who made those decisions and who was the governor and what was this opening speech for the legislature that year, and was it something that the governor wanted and had been thinking about, and all these things were true of charging children as adults. It comes from, children have always been, let me specify that. Black children have always been charged as adults. They've always been seen as adults. And that comes right out of chattel slavery. And it was important to put it that simply in my story, because that is what our system is. And so looking at the laws, it became a way to continue to punish specifically Black children, and use them for labor, etc. But it was to track that in legal text and to see it put that plainly by the governor, by white people who were in charge at a time when non-white people couldn't vote and didn't have their full rights, is to me we have to look at everything in that context of history of how did we get here, and who decided that this would be our fate. And if we aren't actively seeking to change certain systems, then that means that we're okay with the status quo of what Mississippi was like in 1916.
I thought that was so compelling how you did that, bringing in that historical context. It's kind of what we should always be doing. Both of these stories, the horrible conditions at the prisons right now, and this child sentencing story, they have an economic bent to them, right? These guards are not, we're understaffed because we don't pay our guards well. even if you raise pay, like, do people really want those jobs? This is a labor story. This is about the workforce. You know, using punishment and these the disparities in sentencing is a labor tool. You know, we're controlling people through work, and that's kind of the context that I brought onto the restitution center story, which is a MDOC corrections, you know, criminal justice story. But there's also this labor bent, and there's a reason why this is happening due to being in the most impoverished state in the country.
And you tweeted it out, in fact, the other day about David Oshinsky's book about worse than slavery. So if you want to talk about that, you can, or I can. I don't care.
Yeah. I'll talk about my tweet, and then you can talk about the book if you want. But I tweeted out that, you know, it's important, looking at what's going on in our prisons right now, to look at what parchment has always looked like. And David Oshinsky's book, Worse Than Slavery, really puts it in simple terms. Parchment was opened under James K. Vardaman, who was the governor at the time, as a work camp for black men, because he didn't think that they could achieve anything else, and that this was the best thing for them.
He's a horrible racist.
Right.
He's, you know.
Right, and so it's like Parchment, conditions at Parchment have always been vile, always, and it was designed as such. And so I think we have a responsibility as reporters and also as citizens to like not feign this like sense of shock that like Parchment could be so bad when Parchment was designed to be bad.
Yeah, and they used to, and some of you may already know this, you may have read my story, but Parchment they didn't hire enough guards. So they have, obviously, all prisons and jails have trustees. But what was kind of unique about Parchment's situation, and of course other southern states, you know, quickly co-opted this idea to save money, is they literally armed some of the trustees. In fact, they called them trustee shooters. So you can imagine what happened. So your worst kind of imagination of abuse that could possibly happen, and it's literally in the federal court records that I got copies of. It's like it detailed how many different inmates got shot, and it was not just a few. It was like dozens, and so many got killed, and you know it was incredible. You know, because you're putting a weapon of destruction and death, obviously, in the hands of a fellow inmate who might just happen to not like the guy. You know, so it's very fascinating how, but you know, what's it's devolved into now, because they don't have enough guards, just like before. Essentially, they've said, and it's even in documents now. Wilkinson had an internal audit where the warden even talked about it. Essentially, and the same thing at Southern Mississippi Correctional Institute that I wrote about, same thing. They admit, the prison officials admit that the gangs are in charge. Like, because they don't have staff. And so it's a decision, it's literally a decision by them to not have enough staff. So therefore, we're just going to let these guys run it because we don't want to, you know, pay the salaries or whatever all the reasons are.
Should we do our last question and then open for questions?
Sure.
Okay. So I had fun making these questions, and I don't know if anybody has seen the movie The Last Black Man in San Francisco. It's a really, really stunning film made by a local, like Jimmy Fails is from the Bay, and he acts in the film, and it's about San Francisco's rapid gentrification and like what that means for his family and like losing their home and stuff. And so there's a scene where he's riding on the bus, and there's these two white girls talking about how San Francisco is crap and how they don't like the city anymore, and he interrupts them and says, like, excuse me, you don't get to hate this place unless you love it. You can't love it. You can't hate it unless you love it. And so that got me thinking about why I stay in Mississippi. As someone who's 26 and, you know, you give up a lot to live in Mississippi in your 20s. It's not in Atlanta, like where I went to college or anything like that. And it's a place that I often have to defend to my friends because of a lot of the earned stereotypes that the state carries. And so what I wanted to know, what I wanted to end on, was talking about, why do we continue to report here? What keeps us here? Is it the love of the place? Is it the injustices that we hate?
Go ahead. Is it
You
your?
wanna start?
You want to start? Okay.
I think I'm kind of ruined for anywhere else. Just being a journalist here and knowing the great stories that happen. I'm very drawn to the absurdity and like how you can't find these stories anywhere
True.
else.
It's true.
I'm from Washington State. Like I can't go back there now.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating because, you know, I grew up in East Texas, that's where my family's from, and really had no intention of ever moving to Mississippi. And once I got here, I had no intention of staying. And now I don't think I'll ever leave. It's such a wonderful land of paradoxes, Mississippi is. You know, we have some of the nation's poorest people living on some of the world's richest soil.
Right.
We have the most, you know, the nation's most illiterate people, those suffering from illiteracy, living in the same state with some of the world's greatest writers historically. You know, isn't that kind of fascinating? And then Mississippi for years was called the hospitality state. At the same time, it led the nation in lynchings of African Americans. So it's kind of a horrible, cruel irony. But but the stories you can't beat. I worked in Arkansas for 3 straight years, and I think I had one story make the A-Wire, you know, National Wire. And I was here for a week and a half. And I think the thing I always come back to, and it's very much a journalistic phrase that we like to say, which is, you really can't make this stuff up. But I love Mississippi. I can say that now. It's home, and I love it. And there are times when you shake your head a lot. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll finish. Before I don't know if we're like overtime or what, because okay, cool. Because we wanted to open up for questions, but when my mom decided that when I finished high school, she would be leaving New Jersey, where I grew up for the most part, and moving down to Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was a place where when she was talking to headhunters, she's a pediatrician, they wouldn't even tell her where. They were like, "Oh, it's in the South, girl. Like, it's down there." And she was like, "No, but I need to know where I would be working." And so, she took a chance and totally, uprooted her life. And I think, it's been the coolest adventure ever. Because, my mom, and she's here, so sorry to tell your business, but I love you, got remarried to a man who's my stepdad, who grew up in Philadelphia, Mississippi, who was in the first integrated classes in Philadelphia, Mississippi, who used to drive a school bus to pick up Black kids to take them to school hours before, so that he could also make it to school. And he is the son and the descendants of sharecroppers who, you know what I mean? Like, all these things that we talk about I think I'm always amazed about Mississippi is that these, people who lived through some of the most heinous things you could ever think of still walk among us. And they walk often with their heads held high. And I can't imagine, being in another place where, I'm never, the privilege of being able to walk into a district attorney's office and tell me why you're charging so many Black kids as adults and why, you're acting like it's not happening, is a crazy privilege I could never imagine. And especially coming from, my grandmother's family is from Edwards, Mississippi. And so she is from the generation of people who said, don't you ever go below the Mason-Dixon line. And, to step my toe back down here and do so boldly is always a privilege. And I often think about leaving, should I be somewhere where I can go out and not wreck my tires every few weeks because these potholes. But it's really hard you can't find that depth, that richness. And I've lived a lot of other places in the United States, and there's just nothing like Mississippi.
Mississippi's the best of America and the worst of America. And and we are a mirror of America. So I think as a reporter especially, or just not being a reporter, I think it's so incredible. I mean, weirdly enough, what I would say to you is I think living in Mississippi is a privilege.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I want to amend my answer too, because I, you know, I have met my favorite people in the
Yeah,
world here.
exactly.
And there's also, not being from here, and I don't know if people who are from here may take this for granted, but like there's something in the soil. Like you know where you are when you're here. And there's a sense of place that comes with living here that is so comforting.
It's so frustrating at the same time.
It's so frustrating. And
it's all,
a little
you know,
disturbing.
like I said, we're the best and the worst. So
Yeah.
we have it all here.
Questions? I don't know how this works with the mic.
Are you going to pass the mic around? There you go. Sorry.
Thank you, great job. In your role as an investigative journalist, and you work hard and you get a story, and the powers that be that have either been ignoring or suppressed what you brought out as truth, is your job to go the next step beyond reporting, to go to the reform, go see the Attorney General, to go to the Center for Justice, trying to find somebody who take your issue, take the next step, or you do your job and move on?
You want me to? I mean, no, it's not our job, but we might discuss solutions. You follow what I'm saying? I think our job is not necessarily to be an enactor of reform, but we can certainly, hopefully, our stories prompt discussions of reform, and so therefore part of that discussion is maybe I go talk to the Attorney General and say, hey, what are you going to do about this? You got a problem, or the governor, and that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I mean, part of our job is to figure out what entity or person is to be held accountable for the thing that we're writing about. And sometimes that's the hardest to figure out. Like with the story that I just wrote, you know, we were trying to figure out who was really responsible for continuing the system. And you would think like, well, it's DOC's program. They're responsible for making it a good program. But also the judges are sending them there. And they're sending them there under the conditions that that are so unusual that we found. And so the judges then are the ones to be held accountable, and we can make change in that program. The story can create change by letting judges know what they're doing, and even if like nothing happens in policy, which like let's be honest, judges can make a change by not doing it anymore, and the program would cease to exist. So there are lots of ways to go about it.
Yeah.
Question specifically for Jerry. I'm Warren Yoder. In my advocacy days, I pitched a lot of stories to you.
Yeah.
And Betsy introduced you as interrogating people, which I think is exactly wrong. I came to think of you as a story listener. You would get people talking and they would end up telling you things that they had successfully not told any journalists for decades. But I'm wondering, is this story listening, coin a phrase, unique to our time as Southern storytellers and this time and place? Or is this a method that you could teach, other people could learn from?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody can learn from it. I think anyone who's a reporter any kind of time, that's what you do. I mean, the worst thing you can do is to, I guess, well, I hate to pick on someone, but I will. But Charlie Rose, I don't know if you remember Charlie Rose in his interviews, but I used to watch his interviews and you get so mad because this is what I was me yelling at the TV, just shut up. Because he wouldn't ever give people, because silence is your best friend. And you want people to fill that silence, so you need to be silent. And it's hard sometimes, the reporter, the natural inclination is to want to jump in and say something. But that's exactly what we do. We need to listen. And I think we need to, deeper than that, begin to try to understand. Even weirdly enough, I wanted to understand what made Byron D. LeBecq a racist. You know, how did he become a racist? And I was very intrigued by that question. And that's what I asked him basically while I was there. I didn't ask it in that form, but I asked, how did you become politically active?
of all, I want to thank you for what you do. It's a scary time we're living in, and what y'all are doing is so fundamentally important. It's unbelievable. I have a question. Back in the day when the Clearing Ledger was a powerful entity, an organization, a state agency like the NDOC would never even think about simply covering up information or not responding to a journalist request or simply going stone cold silent. It just wouldn't be done. You couldn't do it. The political pressure would be so great, and yet what's happening now is our prisons are in flames, and the NDOC is just going shutting down and stonewalling information. This is scary. I was wondering, and Anna, you talked about your great story, your restitution story, which I read every word, which is truly, I didn't even know about this. It was great work, but I mean, you had to go and get that, through a complete roundabout. What's going on here, and what does this portend, and what can we do about it?
This is something I've been talking about for a while because it's pretty much been that way since I've been here. And I didn't get the privilege of working in a time when these agencies felt the responsibility to respond to us. And I don't think it's, you opened your question talking about the Clarion Ledger and the power that it had at the time. And I don't think it's a function of, the decline of journalism. I think it's a function of like where we are and our political leaders just kind of disrespect or unresponsiveness and not feeling like they need to do that. And I don't know if maybe like the general public or voters have really demanded that of our leadership.
Yeah, we've got to have a public that demands transparency, and I think that's one of the problems is we don't have a public. I'm not beating up on the public, I'm just saying it hasn't coalesced.
Hi, my name is Tandra, and I am this worldwide. Several different individuals been on these panels. You all had some questions and concerns, and you all. What I want to say is, being a citizen and a mother of an individual who was killed in the streets. One panel was up here speaking about how you all want to tell a story, but you can't tell it, and how the social media has taken over, how I give the news is whether it's relevant or not, or truthful or not. The thing is, we feel as though our voices are muted. So now social media is giving some of those individuals who don't have a voice to say something. With anything in this world, there's going to be truth and false to it. But I think an intelligent individual needs to kind of pull the relative information and use it to their advantage. I just wanted to, say thank you all for that. And also, as journalists, because you all are important to us, please continue to tell your stories. Don't let them fall to the wayside, like you all are doing with the jails and, the young people that are being wrongfully accused or getting sentences that are, more than necessary. I just think it's very important that once you tell a story, keep up with that data and keep sharing it with us, because some of us don't have those connections. We don't know how to keep going, and we get lost. And like I said, you all are important. We appreciate you. I just wish that whenever you start something, whether I know it's kind of easy to have all these rules and regulations, you have to be ethically correct, and the democracy, and you got liberals, and you got all these things that come into play. I just wish, like I said, as a mother of a deceased whose voice feels like it's not heard, that when you all start telling stories about the wrongful acts, keep telling them. Please keep sharing it with us, because we need to know, like I said, like that mother, she didn't know any outlets. She didn't know which way to go. But it was you and other individuals likewise who gave her, or giving people likewise, those voices and the connections needed.
Yeah, thank you for that input. I think it's one of our main goals at Mississippi Today to engage the community. That's why we have, that's why we're doing this, and that's why we have these town halls, and we want to be doing more. And so we would love to for everyone here to go back and tell anyone who's having an issue or just wants to be engaged that we want to hear from y'all.
I was shocked about a year ago or more when I read an article, I can't remember where, about refugees seeking asylum being housed at a Mississippi private prison. And so I'm just curious to know if any of your investigations have come upon that story. I haven't seen anything else in that story, so I don't know if they're still there and what's going on with that. Does anybody know?
They're still there. That's essentially the update on that story, unfortunately, is...
As prisoners?
Yes. Some have obviously been deported or whatever, but that prison continues to be used for that purpose, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and so after the raids in August that you probably remember, that was my first chance to seeing how, this is a big population of people, but they're just going through the criminal justice system like anyone else. And these cases are really hard to track and follow up with. And you have to be in the courtroom to figuring out that's a criminal justice system in general, the court system with the records issues that we're having. And it's the same thing when it's, an immigrant, but harder because of all of the, communication issues. So it's a hard story to follow, but I think we're dedicated to it.
Thank you all for the time. I have a question again of the documentary filmmakers, so conducting simulates is a huge part of the relationship moving forward, forward married. And you speak about kind of having a void of silence that you want your subject to fill. Are there any other, from y'all's background as investigative journalists, do you guys have any other interesting insights on approaching an interview with a certain subject? Granted, it's case by case, but any other insights that you may have from your experience?
Well, you obviously want to make people comfortable. For whatever it's worth, I took a lot of the Klansmen out for lunch, so. It was funny, Ralph Eubanks did the same thing. He was taking some guy out, some racist out. So anyway, it was really funny. He did the same thing. He said, "What do you advise, Jerry?" I said, "Well, I used to take him out to lunch." That's what he ended up doing. You want to make people comfortable, so that may be their house. You want to do everything you can to, get them to open up. I think the thing, and this is a Southern thing, okay, is you never ask the question, you always save the toughest question for last anyway. I think that's in general in journalism anyway. But in the South especially, you don't ever really start with what you're after. You're always like, the old saying, how's your mom and them? Especially if it's going to be a tricky interview, you want to get them as comfortable as possible and get them to talk about their childhood, get them to talk about their upbringing, and this is the secret, and everybody in journalism knows this, is everybody loves to talk about themselves, and so if you can just get them to do that, then you can eventually get to maybe some of those tough questions you want to answer.
Yeah, especially if you're working, you said you're a documentary filmmaker, so sound is really important. People are not, when they first start talking to you, their voice is not as warmed up as it will be further into a conversation. So that's really important, especially visually, you want people to be more relaxed. But I also think just on, it's on a personal level, I try to, I always ask people if they have any questions for me, because I think a lot of people don't understand what I'm doing as a journalist and why I keep showing up and why it's important to retell stories, and do you have any childhood photo, all those things are very weird. And it's if you're talking about very sensitive things, as much as I can also respond to questions without getting into my personal political views, etc., but sometimes people just want to know where are you from and why are you doing this and who are your people. And so I think that really works. The term I like when you were talking about silence is pregnant pauses. is like you have no idea what's going to be on the other end of that silence. And like if you interrupt it, if you insert yourself, you have no idea what someone is going to say, what they're going to offer up, what they're thinking about. And so I think the most recent one that I had was when I was interviewing a DA, and he stopped talking for 30 seconds. And that doesn't sound like that much time, but when you're in a room and like there's no windows and there's no clocks and 30 seconds go by and he's still sitting there and hasn't said anything, like I'm not going to give you a lifeboat. Like I'm waiting for an answer. And so I think that we would have never gotten into the nitty gritty of what this white man who grew up in Philadelphia, Mississippi thinks about race currently and who's responsible for racist systems. And if we had interrupted that, we would have given him a lifeline that you don't deserve as a public official. So I think, yeah, just making people comfortable and like taking yourself out of it. Like you may be feeling really uncomfortable, but it's not about you right then. So like you can scream in your car and like throw up, do whatever you need to do after. But I think like those things, it's like, yeah, work for me.
So, a two-part question. Do you, maybe I've watched too much television. Have you ever been threatened by a government entity or corporate entity for asking too many questions? And do you actually go through a process with legal staff as to what your parameters are when you're investigating?
Yes, but I can't talk about it. Yeah, we consult attorneys, yes. For stories, I just had a story. The story that I was talking about was lawyered, right? So we do have to consult legal, and I think we probably all have been threatened with legal action at one point or another. And we just have to know that it happens. We just have to know that our staff is behind us and that we've done the right thing and that, you know, we can be confident in the reporting.
Has the threat always been with legal action, or has there been threats against you personally?
Yes.
Harry can speak to that.
All the above. I mean, I told you the Beckwith story. I mean, look, what we do is important, and it's not about us. And I think I always relate it. I know this may say something about my mentality, but I seem to always relate everything back to the playground, you know. And I was always the small kid that got the crap beaten out of him by the other kids and the bullies. And so I've just not taken well to bullies over the years. And so I just view like threats a lot of times as people trying to bully you, you know. And in fact, I had somebody try to bully me not too terribly long ago, and I didn't say anything back, but I was thinking to myself, I've been threatened by Klansmen, you know, come on.
That's real. Yeah, I agree with you in that it's like a lot of times the posturing is just that. It's like they're trying to get you to go away. And usually that means that there's a story there. Like for example, MDOC is very, 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 very silent. And as we know, there are a lot of stories to be told there. And so I think a lot of times when people are trying to shut you out and get you to go away and make you feel small, that's a good sign that you probably need to file some records requests and call some people and source up. And so, yeah, I think that's a difference a lot of time between journalists who get the story and don't, is that some go away. And a good investigative reporter never stops asking questions.
I think this is going to have to be the last question.
Before I ask a question, I did want to just say how grateful I am as somebody who works for a little bitty paper with zero resources and just kind of hanging on by our fingernails, how great it is to have resources like Mississippi Dad and ProPublica to be able to get these researched, big, deep, expensive stories,
Right.
and be able to pull them and put them on our website is just amazing as far as I'm concerned. And my question is related to that, because I see this almost as a new business model in journalism, that there are going to be some places that are, like the paper that I work for, hyper-local, that can only cover a very limited number of things, and they have to be by, just the gist of who we are and who we say we want to be, about the community, about the people in the community, and about, the meetings that nobody wants to go to, nobody wants to read about, and whatnot. So is this a sustainable model of new journalism, of new investigative journalism moving forward, that there are people like Mississippi Today or organizations like that do this job of investigating, that feed the rest of journalism? So can somebody talk a little bit about that? Is that a sustainable model? Is that something that you see moving forward?
Yeah, I think we're all, well, I've moved on from Reveal, but we've all been at nonprofit outlets, which for my case at Reveal, I was a fellow, which meant that they helped fund this story, but it didn't take me out of Mississippi, and it didn't mean anybody was going to be parachuting in and trying to figure out, what's what. It means that the people who are already on the ground get to stay here and get the funding and the resources to do this work that really needs to be done. And I think that model works really well, because it also means, Reveal's also a nonprofit, which means other papers can republish it for free, which is really important for, like you're saying, small papers that don't have the time and the resources to go out, but they do have readers and they're in communities that they can share this with. And I think that's really important for me, is finding people who will invest in me to stay here and do the work.
And that's why we started Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, is that same reason that she's talking about, is to be able to provide quality content, and it's a nonprofit, and we're providing quality content. I think our stories have been used in almost all the major newspapers across Mississippi, and as well as like the USA Today, the Guardian, that kind of thing. So I think it's a viable model at this point. We're going to have to see over time. We don't really have a whole long track record yet, with nonprofits, but so far, obviously Mississippi Today's done well.
And I think it has to work. It must. It simply
Yeah,
must.
but the alternative is not good. But I think the idea, I think the idea of being able to get the story out, certainly this is our idea, and I think Mississippi Today too, is this idea of being able to get the story out beyond just us, or it's like to be able to share this with other news outlets that desperately needs content, because their newsrooms are vanishing or shrinking drastically. So something needs to be done. So.
There just aren't as many journalists as there used to be, because there aren't the systems aren't there, and people need to buy journalism again, and we need to make journalism cool and normal again.
Yeah,
that's what's cool about nonprofits too, is it's not the ad model where you have to have a
so
business
or whatever,
and or be running an ad about your daughter who's prom queen or something to fund a newspaper. You can have people in the community be subscribers and feel like they're contributing something, and then you get stuff back, like events like this or T-shirts and stuff like that. That's cool.
Yeah.